So first of all, welcome everybody to the very first World Albatross Day. It's really exciting to have you all here with us to celebrate. So I'm just going to start off. I think we do have Elspeth on the call, and Elspeth made us a great video to celebrate World Albatross Day. So I'm just going to play that for you as a start to the celebrations today. And I hope that gave you just a brief overview of what World Albatross Day is about, and just a very small amount on what the threats are to albatrosses. And if you're interested in finding out more after this call, then please do follow these social media links here. So there's also the hashtag Albatross Stories, and you can continue to find out more about the work done for albatrosses. So moving on to who our albatross experts are. So I hope that many of you have been able to look at the YouTube videos that we've been releasing every day this week in the lead up to celebrating World Albatross Day. And we have everybody here today apart from Samantha from Namibia, but instead we have Titus, one of her colleagues, who can answer questions for her. I'm just briefly going to run through who we have on the call. So first up is Richard Phillips from the British Antarctic Survey. Richard has spent a long time monitoring albatross populations. So he is in charge of monitoring populations at South Georgia Island, which is home to many albatross species. And he gave a talk detailing what the population statuses are of the 22 different albatross species in the world. And he also talked a bit about the monitoring that happens down on Bird Island, which is a very special albatross island. And second up, we have Caitlin Frankish. So Caitlin is working with Richard as a PhD student, and she's specifically been looking at grey-headed albatross juveniles and doing analysing tracking studies to have a look to see if we can understand more about where these birds are going and where they're coming into threat with fisheries. So she knows a lot about that if you have some questions about fisheries overlaps and juveniles. Third up, we have Peter Thompson. So Peter is joining us, it looks like from South Georgia, but I'm not sure if he is actually there right now. Peter is a representative of a large fishing company that fishes around South Georgia Island. He's been doing that for a long time, and he's been one of the pioneers really in the fishing industry for bringing seabird mitigation measures into the fishery and really almost eliminating seabird bycatch. So it's a real success story, and it's great to have Peter here. Next up, we have Maria Diaz. So Maria works for BirdLife International, and she is in charge of all the science work that's happening in BirdLife on seabirds. And she can tell you a lot about the threats to them. She really recently released a paper on all the threats to seabirds, which has given us a really firm understanding of what the threats are that albatrosses and other birds are facing, which gives us a great starting point for understanding where we need to focus our attentions. We also have Yasuko here from Japan. Hi, Yasuko. So Yasuko also works for BirdLife International, and her role is engaging with the fishing industry of Japan to try and reduce seabird bycatch that's happening in their tuna high seas fleets. In her talk, she showed some information about the overlap of South Georgia albatrosses and the Japanese fishing fleet, and so she's working very hard to try and to get those reductions happening, which isn't an easy job, but she's doing a fantastic role at the moment. We also have Stefan here, who's the conservation scientist. Stefan gave a talk about invasive species. He gave a really clear description of what invasive species are and why they've become such a big problem for seabirds at the moment. And he also gave a little bit of information about the Gough Island eradication project. So if you have any questions on invasive species eradications, then Stefan is the person to ask. We have Titus here. As I mentioned, Titus is from Namibia and he is one of our Albatross Task Force instructors. Titus has been working with us for a couple of years now and he's been really instrumental in the massive bycatch reductions that we've recently seen in Namibia. He actually goes out onto the fishing boats and works with fishers directly. So if you have any questions on what it's like to work at sea, what it's like to be part of a group that's had such great successes, then please direct your questions to him. And we're almost there. We also have Dimas here. Dimas is from Brazil. He works for the Albatross Task Force as well as Projeto Albatross, which is the main organization that have worked to protect albatrosses in Brazil for the last 30 years. Dimas, like Titus, also has spent a lot of time out at sea working with fishers to try and reduce albatross bycatch, and he can answer lots of questions about that. And we also have Andrea here from South Africa. Andrea, she leads the team, the Albatross Task Force team in South Africa, which, like Namibia, has had some of the best successes that we've seen through our Albatross Task Force teams for reducing bycatch there. We've seen a huge reduction in the trawl fishery, and if you want to find out what's happening next in South Africa, then Andrea, and also Reason, who is on the call too, who's one of the instructors for the South Africa Albatross Task Force. You can ask those guys. And then finally me, I'm Steph Prince and I work for the RSPB. So I work with these guys a lot. And my main role is working to try and reduce high seas bycatch. So it's mainly managing some of the projects, so working closely with YASCO in Japan and some other partners in Taiwan and other countries. Just wanted to say thank you to all of our partners. So we have many logos, but this is some of the groups that have been working together, mainly as part of the Albatross Task Force and working with BirdLife International to reduce seabird bycatch around the world. So thank you to all of them. And we also just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of the funders. I think some of you may be on the call today who've been funding some of the albatross bycatch reduction work. You can see we have a whole host of organizations on there. So thank you so much to you for making this possible, because without this fundraising, we couldn't actually make any of the differences that we have done. Right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Great, it looks like we already have, do we have any questions? We already have some questions. So I'll start going through the questions. I do have some that have come in offline. So if we run out of questions in the Q&A box, then I'll ask some of those. But please, no question is a silly question. Ask anything you want to know about albatrosses. It can be a technical, scientific question, or it can just be, you know, what's your favorite albatross? Why are albatross special? Anything you want. Okay, so let's see who we've got first. So we've got a question from Vicky from Scotland. So Vicky asks, given that we have no albatross in the UK, how can we improve their PR and get people to support them in the same way they do for other things like garden birds? And what one thing could we do to help albatross wherever they are? Okay, so I think this is probably a good question for someone in the UK. So as an RSPB representative, I think, Stefan, do you want to have a go at saying why we should, how we can improve the PR for albatrosses?
Okay. So I'm not a PR person, but the first thing I should say is that we actually have a lot of albatrosses in the UK, not in the mainland, in England, Scotland, and Wales, but the UK owns quite a lot of islands in the Southern Ocean, Falklands, South Georgia, Gough Island, and they are full of albatrosses. So the UK is actually responsible for a large proportion of albatross populations around the world. But you're right that very few people in England and Scotland know about them. So, and the World Albatross Day is one of these efforts to bring the albatrosses more to the attention of a broader audience. So yeah, tell people about what albatrosses are and how their daily lives may affect albatrosses. And I think the main connection that we sitting in England or in Scotland or in Wales have on the daily lives of albatrosses is that we eat fish that gets caught in the oceans where the albatrosses fly around. So telling people about what their consuming choices have the effects of their fish consumption on albatross populations might make that link. In terms of other PR, I think Nina might be better placed to let us know how we can increase the popularity of albatrosses amongst people who will likely never see them in the wild.
Yeah, I think one thing that you can do is you can spread the word about the social media stories that are coming out. So there's the Albatross Stories Instagram page, there's the Albatross Task Force Facebook and Twitter pages. So I think if you can try and share this information with other people you know, because I think a lot of people, they've heard of albatrosses, but they don't know about the threats facing them. And they don't, yeah, like Stefan said, they don't know that they're actually UK species. So just raising as much awareness as possible like that is one of the things that we'd really like people to concentrate on. Okay, thanks, Stefan. So the next question is for Richard. So Richard, this question is from Ethan, who's age 5 and from the UK. And he asks, what are the main things that albatross eat?
Okay, Ethan, well, nice to hear from you. So it depends a lot on the species, but albatrosses usually eat some kind of one or more of squid. So and there are particular species that especially like squid, like wandering albatrosses, and then others eat lots of crustaceans. So little things like krill, which are just like the shrimps, tiny shrimps that live in the ocean. They're actually the base of the food chain or a substantial link in the kind of food web in Antarctica. And then other albatrosses eat fish. And the thing is that most of the time they catch the fish for themselves, but because they like fish generally, they also follow fishing vessels when they're discarding the fish that the fishermen don't want to catch and don't want to keep. And then so the albatrosses follow those vessels, and they also they feed on the fish that's dropped over to the side, and they feed on the fish and the squid that's used as bait on long lines, and then that's how they end up being captured. And so, in fact, albatrosses are real, they like lots of different kinds of prey and stuff they find at sea. But in fact, that actually is what makes them vulnerable to some of the threats, and particularly that from fisheries.
Thanks, Richard. I hope, Ethan, that answered your question. Okay, so the next question, so we're back to Stefan. So Stefan, there's a question here from Marta from Spain/France, and she's asking, so the poison that's used to kill rats and mice, can that have an effect on other species living on islands?
Yes, sadly it does. So when we have to remove invasive species from an island, it's a decision that is not taken very lightly, because we have to kill large numbers of rats and mice, which is very unfortunate because it's not their fault that they're there. It's the people's fault to bring them there in the first place. And at the moment, the most efficient way, or the only way to do that, is to use a poison that is specific to vertebrates. So it acts on the blood coagulation, and it will kill mammals and birds. So whenever we do an eradication on an island, we have to carefully consider what other animals on the island might also eat that bait, and what would happen to those animals. And for many eradications, that actually is one of the biggest and most complex aspects of the eradication, where we need to safeguard the other species that could potentially eat the poison and could potentially die, and keep them in captivity and safety, to ensure that we're not actually accidentally eradicating the native species that we're trying to protect during the course of eradicating the invasive species. So for several eradications, we have built large aviaries where we catch hundreds of native birds to keep them in a safe place and ensure that they can't eat the poison during the time it is on the ground while we eradicate the invasive species. And that is very, very complex and is very, very difficult.
Thanks, Stefan, for that answer. Yeah, it is a very tricky thing. And I think we've seen on other islands where eradications have taken place, such as South Georgia, that there were some impacts on other species like skuas and ducks. But following that eradication, just a year or so later, actually the populations of those birds increased quite a lot to what they were before the eradication took place, because they were being much more successful at breeding. So it's difficult, but overall, you know, it's a great thing to stop albatrosses going extinct. So it's important work. Okay, so next question. They're coming in so fast, I'm going to have to scroll back up. Okay, the next question from Maria. Can you take this question? So this is a question from Fiona in Jersey, which is in the Channel Islands. And she says that in Jersey, they have the Durrell Foundation, who do really amazing work for wildlife conservation. And do you know if they do anything for albatrosses? And she also asked if you can list the different UK places where albatrosses are.
Sorry, Steph, is that a question for me? I'm not sure if I'm the best person to reply to that question. I'm really sorry. Maybe, okay. Maybe Richard or Steph.
Okay, maybe if you could you answer the question around which UK territories the albatrosses are found?
Yeah, well, I think Richard already mentioned that. So we can find albatrosses in the Falkland Islands. We can find also in Gulf, in Tristan da Cunha archipelago in South Georgia, of course. And if I'm not wrong, I think that's it. But Richard probably can correct me if I'm missing.
Give us a nod, Richard.
Well, yes, there was one in Shetland for a long time, a black-barred albatross that hang around at the gannets.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes, yeah, they do visit mainland here. Well, here, not here because I'm in Portugal, but yeah, it's mostly these three areas. So South Georgia, the Falklands, and Tristan da Cunha Gulf.
Yeah. Okay, and then Fiona, just to answer your question about Durrell, I don't think they do any work on albatrosses. I think if they did, we would know about it. So I think it's not a group of species that they concentrate on. Okay, so next question. Let's give this question to Dimas. So question is from Shimiso from South Africa, and they're asking, what stage of the breeding cycle does adult mortality have the biggest impact on breeding success?
So thank you very much for the question. Well, there are two things. One thing is which is the stage of the life cycle. The birds are more likely to be killed, are more vulnerable. In this aspect, for most of the species we are working with on the southern hemisphere, the non-breeding cycle it's more risky for those birds because they forage further north than the areas on the islands that are nowadays well managed in terms of the fisheries. So the non-breeding period is the more danger for the birds to be caught in poor managed long-line fisheries in waters further north. But for the breeding cycle and the population itself, like for a bird itself, if your bird is killed during the egg laying period or just during brood guard when the chick is very small, it's very likely that the chick will die and the incubation will not be successful. So a bird that's killed during this period of the breeding cycle will have this extra impact on the population, the effect on the outcome of the breeding season. I hope I answered already your question.
So that's great.
So just another observation. That's why it's very important to track the birds in different stages of the life cycle to see where they are going and what's happening in that kind of fisheries and take this into account in managing plans.
definitely. Okay, so the next question is actually for everybody, but I think maybe we'll just restrict it to 3 of us because otherwise it'll take us a long time to get through. So the next question comes from Tommy, and he's asking, what is your favorite albatross species? So maybe we hear from Caitlin, Yazko, and Titus in that order. What is your favorite albatross species? So Caitlin, you're first.
Thanks for the question, Tommy. So my favorite albatross species is probably the black-browed albatross. So I got to do some fieldwork with them last year, and I just came to see how incredibly, well, both goofy, but how charismatic they were as well. And it was just a real pleasure to get to see them interact with their chicks and just kind of see them on a day-to-day basis. And I think they're also incredibly beautiful with the black line above their eye. They're very, very pretty albatrosses.
Yeah, they are. Good answer. Okay, Yazko, how about you? What's your favorite albatross species?
Okay, well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, Tommy, thank you for the question. Like being in Japan, probably I should say my favorite is short-tail albatross in Japan. But if I have to pick one, I want to say wandering albatross, because I'm managing social media accounts in Japan to raise awareness of albatrosses in general and threats they are facing for the Japanese audience. And I get to receive lots of great photos of wandering albatross chicks from South Georgia. So I'm kind of attached to those fluffy and goofy looking chicks.
Great. Thanks, Yazko. And Titus, what's your favorite albatross?
I like the shy albatross. I just find it magnificent and charismatic. It just has that confidence about it. But answer changes every now and then. On a different day, I might have said black-browed albatross, but yeah, today let's go with the shy albatross.
Yeah, Caitlin already said black brow, so we'll go with shy. Yeah, to be truthful, they're all pretty amazing, so it is very hard to pick a favorite. Okay, so the next question for Andrea is from Evelyn, age 7, from the UK, and she asks, what is it like to be up close to an albatross?
I would say it's the most amazing experience. Spending a year on Gough to me was life-changing, transformative in every aspect, and I think it's humbling would be my sort of main take from that. When you watch albatross species just being one with the element as they soar over you, but then when they land and they tumble head first and just waddle along to their chicks to feed them, they're unaware, oblivious of how clumsy and wobbly they look, and yet their bond with their chicks is just unbelievable. It's just incredible. And when they come together with a mate and they spend 15 minutes just grooming each other, it's breathtaking. I think, yeah, that is to me the most amazing thing about albatrosses.
Yeah, they're wonderful. No, I agree. Spending a year with albatrosses is a life-changing one. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so the next question is from Michelle. So Michelle says, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that Tristan albatross is the only critically endangered species which the UK is responsible for, and it's on Gough. In her experience, this is a compelling story for anyone who is passionate about birds in general, and our supporters really have the chance to save a species. So should we just quickly go to Stefan on that one, seeing as he is the Gough person?
Yes, so the Tristan albatross is the only critically endangered albatross that the UK is responsible for. There is another endemic species on Gough, the Gough finch or Gough bunting, that is also endemic to Gough and is critically endangered. So there are 2 critically endangered species the UK is responsible for, but we could save both of them with a successful mouse eradication on Gough. So yes, it's absolutely a great reason to to support that eradication effort.
Great, thanks, Stefan.
Hi, Steph. Can I just have a comment before?
Yes, of course, Dimas, go ahead.
And I just wanted to mention a point that the UK, like other countries, they're actually responsible for the breeding territories, the island of the albatross breed. But actually, who are responsible for the albatrosses are all the nations that albatross interact with through the fishing fleets. So the albatross breed in UK territories, but they fly over the sea territory, the economic exclusive zones of several countries, and over the high seas and interact with fleets from different countries. And they are actually in the list of threatened species of many countries and management plans. And much of what happened in terms of impact and what will decide the fate of the albatross are actually on the hands of other nations through their fishing fleet. So actually, who are responsible for the albatross? Everybody that's actually interacting with these birds anyway, and must be engaged in protecting them to successfully achieve the conservation goals, and that's what we're all doing here. Just to mention that I think it's important to everybody understand the scale of the problem and how everybody must be working together.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dimas. It really is, because albatrosses are such highly pelagic species, like they don't stay in one area. So these birds are traveling all the way around the globe. And so just by protecting them, for example, in the fishery that Peter works in South Georgia, that's great, but those birds are not staying there the whole year. So it really does depend on multiple nations to work together to protect them. And then the next question again is about very endangered species. So Jerome asks us, what albatross species is at most risk of extinction and why? And I think that one would be a good one for Richard.
Hi, Jerome. Well, I mean, there's two albatrosses that are now listed as critical by IUCN. So that's Tristan albatross that we've been hearing about, and also waved albatross in the Galapagos Islands. So the good thing about the IUCN criteria, so the World Conservation Union criteria, which are used to categorize threat status, is they use a standardized set of rules, which, depending on populations, they take account of population size, and they take account of the rate of the population decline and the distribution of the animals. So pretty much these two species are kind of stand out as being the ones that are most threatened. The Tristan albatross is a relatively small population. Waved albatross in the Galapagos is actually not that uncommon a species, but the rate of decline is very steep, which is why they are particularly at risk. So yes, those are probably the top two, but then there's also another set of species that are endangered. So that's just one category down. It's the second most threatened group. And there's about 6 species that are endangered. And in fact, there's only one albatross that isn't threatened, and that's blackbird albatross that's least concern, according to IUCN. But interestingly enough, the population at South Georgia is actually a priority population for conservation, because although the blackbird albatross is doing well globally, it's doing badly at South Georgia, probably because of bycatch and tuna longline fisheries in the South Atlantic.
Great, thank you so much, Richard, for that great explanation. So our next question comes from Grant Humphreys. So he's based in Scotland, but he's actually from Newfoundland. And he's got a couple of questions. So the first one is for Maria. So Maria, which albatross species are yet to be tracked? Or perhaps another way of asking that is, what are the gaps in our knowledge of the distribution of species? So that also maybe one for Caitlin, as she's been trying to fill some of those gaps lately. So Maria first.
Yeah, thanks, Grant, for the question. So well, I'm happy to say that we have tracking data for all species of albatrosses. It's quite impressive. And I would say that probably the family of the albatrosses was the first one that we managed to have tracking data for all the species. And that, I guess, is because they are very good candidates to tracking studies, because for a long time we didn't know about their at-sea distribution, a lot of curiosity around where they would go when they go out at sea to forage. So there was a lot of interest in tracking albatrosses, and because they are large, so in the very beginning of the tracking studies, I think that they were the perfect candidates, and that's why when we started, for example, the seabird tracking database, it was a long time ago, more than 12 years ago. We had already data for I think for all albatross species, or at least in the very beginning, the albatrosses were very well covered. But we still have lots of gaps, and it's mostly for the juvenile and immature parts of their life, because it's much more challenging to study in that part. We need to it's not that easy as deploying a GPS and then wait for them to come back, because they do not come back so soon. We need to wait a long time, so use another type of devices. So the juveniles and the immatures are for sure the main gaps in terms of tracking studies, I would say. But maybe Kathleen can add a bit more to this.
I think you've covered most of what I would have said, Maria, but I'll just add that what we're seeing, the very first tracks we're getting back from juvenile albatrosses, is that it seems that they can do very different things from adults, which is why it's so important to track different individuals within a population. And this is so crucial to know for albatrosses, as it could be that juveniles are overlapping to a different extent with fishing effort at sea. And a few papers have shown that because juveniles are inexperienced or potentially a bit naive in their foraging behavior, they might be more at risk than adults to end up as bycatch in different types of fisheries. So it's definitely interesting to see what juveniles do. And in particular, we have much less information on the second and third and even fourth years of these birds at sea. So it'd be quite nice to know if they end up doing similar things to adults, or if it takes quite a few years for them to develop specific migratory strategies, etc.
Great, thank you, Maria and Caitlin. That was a really good answer. So Gran had a second question. This one is for Titus. So Titus, what is the biggest hurdle that you've had to overcome in rolling out protections for albatross in Namibia? And is there any indication that the public might not support the protection?
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, for the question. I think the biggest hurdle we had to overcome in rolling out protection for albatross was just general awareness. Stakeholders, fishermen, observers, researchers from the government were not aware of the challenges that are there. They were not aware of, particularly from the trawl vessels perspective, and us being able to go on the vessels and show them where the problems are and making them aware of how this is affecting the albatrosses, and giving them examples from the other teams, what other countries have achieved in protecting albatrosses, helped them understand what we needed to do moving forward. So I think raising awareness was really just the first thing that we had to do, and beyond that, it was easier to explain to people what we need to do and to roll out strategies and mitigation measures. Obviously, with the public, there is no pushback generally. People also, again, the public don't know. Albatrosses live in high seas and they hardly come to land. So many people don't know anything about albatrosses unless we tell them about it. So when we go to people and talk about albatrosses, people are interested and people are, are curious about these things. So they are amazed at the work we do and do support us in ensuring that we continue with our work. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Titus. And I think linked to that question, the next question is going to be for Peter. So I'll just unmute you, Peter. So the question comes from John O'Hanley, who is based in the UK, but from South Africa. And he asks, what do you think is the information or messaging that's missing or could be improved upon for more fisheries to uptake albatross? or other non-target species conservation measures when considering how a fishery decides its operations. And he's wondering, what information do you think is already being provided well, and why was that useful to you?
That is that's a great question. I think that the industry have been a little bit slack in giving some of the great news that we've managed to come up with the last 20 years. So particularly what started with South Georgia government and RSPB initiative in the mid-90s, which I spoke about in my talk, and how that was rolled across the whole of CAMLAR, the whole of the southern Antarctic Ocean, and the fantastic result that that's had. So I think it could be a fair criticism that we haven't shown both the industry and sort of the government side of other fisheries around the globe exactly, if you put really quite simple mitigation measures in, what impact you can have. So I think we could do a better job on actually saying this is what we did, this was the result, and it's quite a convincing argument. So I think that's an excellent point, and something that we probably should continue to push through forums like this and other work that BirdLife are doing.
Great, thank you, Peter. Okay, so the next question is a bit of a tricky one. So this is from Joe Jeffcoat from the UK. I might ask this to Richard. Richard, is there an evolutionary reason for why albatross grows so large? Or is it more to do with having an abundance of food at sea, for example?
Thanks, Steph.
You're welcome.
And Joe for the question. I saw this one, I've actually been thinking about it for a little while. I think it's probably, there's probably various reasons. So albatross is a particular mode of flying that's flap gliding, that involves mostly gliding and using the energy that comes from the wind as it hits the sea surface and as it hits waves, and they use that to gain lift. And then that's what propels them along. And I suspect that that particular way of flying, then it's actually an advantage to have a large wing area. So that, because that gives you more lift, because there's kind of more of a surface for the wind to catch in effect. So that's one thing. It's probably, so it's to do with the flight efficiency. The second thing is, you know, food is quite patchy at sea, and albatrosses make these enormous journeys to go and find food, and you know, it can take a while to find and you know, a nice rich patch of food. And during incubation, one partner just stays on the nest for, in some cases, up to 2 weeks or even 3 weeks, and very occasionally in big albatrosses like wandering albatrosses for up to a month. And bigger animals can store proportionately more fat reserves. So there's probably an advantage to being a great big wandering albatross with lots of fat that allows you to last lots of several weeks on the nest. So I think those things probably contribute to their big size. But I should say though that there were pterosaurs, so like in the same group as the pterodactyls, with even much larger wingspans than albatrosses. So if you'd been around a few tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, you'd have seen pterosaurs that would have even dwarfed albatrosses in terms of body size and body mass. So.
Thanks, Richard. That was a good answer. So, well done. Okay, the next question is for Stefan. So, Stefan, your question is, do you try to eradicate invasive species during the non-nesting seasons to cut down on the killing of albatrosses? And on Gough, what is the optimum time when albatrosses are missing from the island?
Yes, very good question. Again, that's very tricky and depends on the island. But first of all, we try not to kill any albatross when we eradicate invasive species. Usually albatrosses don't eat anything on an island, so they are very unlikely to pick up the poison that we put out to kill mice or rats. So albatrosses are fortunately not at risk to be poisoned. Other birds are, as I explained before. When we decide on what the best time is for an eradication, it depends mostly on the time of the year when we think the invasive species is most vulnerable and is most likely to eat the poison. And that is usually in late winter when they're very hungry, when there's not much food in the environment that they could eat. If you do it during the summer when there's lots of fruit and other food around, then the mice or the rats would be much less likely to eat something novel that looks like poison. So we try and do it when there is no food for the invasive species to maximize the chance that they will actually eat the poison. And once we've considered that, we will then also consider that other species that might accidentally eat the poison are not on the island. On Gough, because it's in the southern hemisphere, the winter is from May to September. And so that's the best time when the mice have the least food available on the island. And fortunately, that is also the time when most of the albatrosses are out at sea, because their nesting season starts in September and the chicks fledge sort of in April and May. Except for the Tristan albatross, so the critically endangered species, because it's a very large albatross species, they are actually on the island throughout the year, because it takes them 12 months to raise a chick. So they come in January and lay eggs, and then the chicks hatch sometime in April, but it takes them until December before they actually fledge. So there's no month of the year when the Tristan albatross is not on the island. And yeah, but the timing that we pick for Gough is the best to make sure that the mice will eat the poison, and the Tristan albatross chicks are very unlikely to eat the poison. So I don't think we will kill any albatrosses.
Thanks, Stefan. And yeah, I think from other eradications that have happened, no albatrosses have been killed, because they're not the kind of species, as Stefan said, that would pick up food from the land. It's more the scavenging birds that we need to worry about. Okay, so the next question, this one's for Maria. So Maria, this is from David Clapp from the UK, and he is asking, what happens to birds similar to albatross species, but that the albatross task force don't work with? How are those birds protected, such as large shearwaters and other bird life casualties of the fishing industries? Are there other species slipping through that need our protection too? I thought you might be good, seeing as you did the threat study for seabirds.
No, absolutely. So bycatch is a problem that is affecting not only albatrosses, but many, many other seabird species in the world. Of course, many species that belong to the same order as the albatrosses, for example, large petrels, shearwaters. But not only, of course, well, even depending on the techniques, but sea ducks, that some people think that they are not seabirds, but they are also seabirds. They are also highly affected by gillnets, for example. But well, coming back to the other species, similar species like shearwaters and petrels, well, BirdLife works with these species as well, not via the Albatross Task Force, that is in fact more, but well, even within the Albatross Task Force, because measures that we use to prevent the bycatch of albatrosses, of course, sometimes they also work with other species. So it's not only albatrosses can be seen as a flagship species in this case, because they are very good to spread this message that the bycatch is a big problem. But by saving the albatrosses and bringing attention to this problem, we are also addressing the problem for many other species. And for example, in Europe, the BirdLife partners work a lot with many other species of shearwaters and petrels. They don't breed in Europe, as you know, well, at least Northern Europe, the albatrosses, but the shearwaters and petrels, they do, and they are also highly affected by bycatch. And so there are a lot of work also with other species. Sometimes probably it's not so much promoted, again, because albatrosses are very charismatic and are species that we think that they are good species to tell this story, but we are working also with other species. And also with sea ducks via the gill network that our SPB is also living on. So we do work with many other species that are affected by bycatch.
Great, thank you, Maria. So the next question is from Jerome, and this one's for Andrea. So Andrea, can you explain exactly what happens when an albatross encounters a fishing vessel and is killed taking the fishing bait? And could you give a really brief explanation of the mitigation measures that can be used to stop this from happening? So just brief, because we've only got 10 minutes left. We've got quite a few questions still to get through.
Sure. Very brief. The two main interactions that happens, the one is colliding with trawl cables. And that's just, I'm just going to say that, they collide with the cables that are dragging the net, and they're exposed on the surface of the water. So as the birds, because there's discards from the factory on the vessels, the birds are then scrambling for scraps, and they collide with their big wings on these cables. So that's one of the main mortality risks that they're exposed to in the trawl fishery. In the longline fishery, it's during setting. So when the hooks are being released into the water, they are baited. And in the time it takes, a few seconds, from them being on the surface of the water to sinking to below 20 meters, 30 meters, which is out of reach of most seabirds. And I'm not talking albatrosses here, I'm talking shearwaters and petrels. That is a time lapse, that is the window of opportunity that birds have to get caught on the hooks. So the colliding with the trawl fisheries happen during daytime. It's as continuously while the vessel is trawling, so that could be up to 3 hours per trawl per vessel, and then 3 times a day. And the long line is usually one for the setting of several kilometers of baited long line lines. The way to mitigate it is with trawl fishery, primarily bird scaring lines. They really help. And that what they do is that they sit on either side of the 2 trawl cables that are holding onto the net, and effectively scare them away and keep them almost like a physical barrier away from these cables. And then managing the discard, so not discarding offal while trawling. And on the long line vessels, again, it's a bird scaring line to be deployed during the whole setting period, so that it's also effectively scaring the birds away. And also night setting is one of the another big mitigation measure in the long line fishery, because a lot of the birds don't fly at night, and that's been said before. And the final one is to sink the hooks quickly enough. So as soon as you can sink the hooks by adding weights to them individually beyond those 20 meters, then they're out of reach of most foraging seabirds. Is that quick enough?
That was good, and a lot of information in there. So yeah, thanks for explaining that. Okay, next question is another one from Ethan. So Dimas, can you take this question? The question is, can albatrosses swim underwater? And if so, how deep can they swim?
Well, yes, albatrosses can swim underwater. Yeah, they dive, and they can do that. But the albatrosses, they don't dive very depth. They are very deep. They're very shallow divers. The smaller species, please correct me, Richard, you might know the exactly answer, but the black browns, foraging around fishing vessels, they do short dives like 2-3 meters, but we know they can dive further when in some studies. But like in the large albatross, wandering albatross, Tristan albatross, royal albatross, these big fluffy guys floating, they don't really dive at all, just they're very, very shallow. But petrels dive a lot further than 10 meters easy, like white-chin petrels, gray petrels, great shearwaters, and foraging behind fishing vessels, diving for longline hooks. Those smaller birds, they can reach the baits and then they bring back to the surface. And as the albatross are larger, they just take the baits from them. And so these interactions with smaller species that dive deeper and bring the baits back to the surface are one very important as well that's have impacts on the albatross's bycatch. But indeed, albatross are not great divers, and they evolve with just picking up stuff on the surface as they fly over the ocean. That's what their foraging strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Dimas. Yeah, so they're not very good at diving. So the next question is from Francis from the UK, and this is to Maria. Maria, in your talk, you mentioned that disease was a threat to 23% of albatrosses. And she wants to know, is this something that we should be worried about? And is that an increasing or decreasing threat?
Okay, thanks for your question. Yeah, well, I think that it is something that we should worry about. Well, diseases is something that is not very well studied, especially when compared with other kind of threats. So in our review, that was a challenge that we had, was in fact to deal with these different kinds of threats that are subjected to so different effort in terms of studies, right? And for example, climate change, of course, there are a lot of studies, recent studies about the impact of climate change, and diseases is something that, in fact, it's much more difficult to find studies. Maybe the ecologists that go to the field, they are not so interested in studying diseases, and or it's more challenging. I was lucky to be some time in working in Amsterdam Island in the South Indian Ocean. Is an island, a very remote island that, in fact, the albatross is there, especially the Indian yellow-nosed albatross. That, by the way, is my favorite species. Also, to reply to Tommy to his question. Is suffering a lot with the problem of the diseases and is relatively well studied. And the problem of diseases is that in many cases they are also, of course, linked with the problem of invasive species. That, for example, the fact that there are rats in the colonies, they help spreading the diseases in a much easier way between nests. There is some evidence that the diseases are increasing with the climate change as well. But again, it's something that we are very far away from understanding a bit better. But it's important to say that if in some cases the diseases are natural diseases, in the case of Amsterdam Island, we think that was probably introduced with the chickens. So when the first colonizers brought chickens to the islands, the chickens had avian cholera, and then that was the beginning of the spread of the diseases that is causing massive declines of the albatrosses, and not only albatrosses, penguins are also heavily affected by diseases. So it's something that for sure we need to be worried about, and maybe invest a bit more in understanding and studying the problem.
Great, thank you, Maria. So just we're almost at 1, and I know some of our speakers have to go. So there's just one final question for Stefan, and hopefully a few others can stay a bit longer. So Stefan, in your last 2 minutes, can you tell us, is there any effects being seen from rodent bait being passed through the food chain? And that's from Michelle.
Yes, this is an open field of research. So the bait that we use to poison rats and mice usually degenerates in the environment very quickly, and it does not bioaccumulate. But there can be effects when, for example, species that eat dead bodies pick up mice or rats that have been killed by the poison, as we intend to do, and species like skuas, for example, then eat large numbers of these dead animals that can have a secondary poisoning effect. So it's possible that scavenging species can also be poisoned if they pick up quite a large number of the invasive species that we poison. But the poison does not stay in the environment for very long. There have been some studies that found residues of the poison in some animals quite a few months or years after an eradication, but not at a level that would cause mortality. So the poison doesn't disappear entirely within a few months, but the pellets break down and it dissipates into the environment, so that on a place like Gough, especially where it rains a lot, the bait will break down, and within 2 months it will not pose any danger anymore to the animals on the island.
Great, thank you, Stefan. I know you have to go because you've got job interviews to do for the next lucky people to go to Gough Island. So thank you, and we'll see you later. Great. So the next question is for Jasko. So Jasko, in your talk, you mentioned that you were working with tuna purchasing companies in Japan. So how can working with those companies help stop albatross bycatch?
Thank you for the great question. So there are certain regulations for, if I can talk about tuna longline fisheries in high seas. Certain regulations are already placed for vessels to use mitigation measures but unfortunately, not all the vessels are using them. And the part of the problem is lack of monitoring. So which vessels are using those mandatory regulations. So by bringing tuna purchasing companies, those are direct clients for fishing companies, it would keep additional pressure for those fishing companies to feel, okay, they need to do something to reduce bycatch. And there are some companies in Japan, those have sustainable sourcing policies. And they are saying on paper that they only buy seafood from vessels doing sustainable things for the environment, but they probably don't know what's happening in terms of seabird bycatch. So we are trying to raise awareness in Japan through the supply chain that this is happening and they can be a big part of solving this problem. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, that's great, Yasko. And it's probably worth saying as well that BirdLife International has been working with fishing companies like Peter's to try and raise awareness in countries that maybe haven't got as far as the South Georgia fishery. So Peter came out to Japan and met with some of these tuna purchases companies last year when we were still able to leave our houses. So it's a really great collaboration to work together. And so Peter, the next question, this is about fishing, so I thought it's a perfect one for you. So Helena from the UK says that in the UK, we have a few companies who fish for tuna using pole and line. And should that be the tuna that they're eating? So how can you know that the fish you buy isn't killing albatrosses?
Great question. Yes, I mean, if you're doing pole and line, sort of more traditional, more artisanal method of fishing, I'd say that you're probably doing as much as you could do to ensure that you're not indulging a fishery that is catching albatross. These were they're individually caught by a fisherman standing on the back of a vessel with literally a long pole with a fishing line on it and a hook dabbing the water. So normally they do identify themselves on the tin, or if it's being sold frozen under an MSC, Marine Stewardship Council sort of eco-label fishery. So I think that would be an excellent choice. I know there are some fisheries, even UK fisheries like the island of St Helena, they've gone for a sort of one-by-one approach to pole and line fishing. And I know there's an awful lot of pole and line boats certainly out of South Africa, and I'll be corrected by my friends in Namibia, but I think there's also a good pole and line fishing there. So yeah, if you want a good yardstick, if you're in the supermarket, that's a great choice.
Great, thanks Peter, that was really helpful. So next question is from Carolina in the UK, and she has a question to Titus and possibly to DMAS as well. So this is for the Albatross Task Force teams that have been out at sea. And the question is, what is it like being on a fishing boat and training the fishermen to use the measures? Do you think that they change the way that they see seabirds?
Yeah.
Titus, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina, for the wonderful question. Being out at sea, generally, for a nature enthusiast like myself, it's always exciting. The possibility of seeing a lot of marine wildlife is always the big motivator. And then given the fact that I can contribute to the conservation of one of the most charismatic species out there, is really, I don't need any extra push for me to go out to sea. But generally, working with fishermen in Namibia is often very smooth because they are eager to learn. They want to be involved in things that do help conserve our ocean. Once you make them understand how conserving albatrosses is good for the fishery as a whole and how this will allow the Namibian fish product to be sold at premium prices, it makes it really easy to work with them. So fishermen are always eager to learn, and coming to them and showing them appreciation for their work and just showing them how to improve, reduce the impact they have on the environment always makes it easy to work with them. So yeah, it's always exciting working with them.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Titus. And Dimas, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I will try to be brief, but yeah, it's the most important component of the task force working on board with fishermen, and this is very challenging as well, in terms of training and education and awareness, because fishermen are very busy men, and they have heavy work days and a lot of things to deal with, and also we are the albatross are threatened, but because you follow the populations and the declines. But if you are on board a fishing vessel, you have hundreds of albatross flying around your vessel, and sometimes it's quite difficult to explain the concept of risk of extinction to these guys if every day they have 200 albatross around their vessel. So it's a small progress in terms of bringing awareness to these people, and also they have no idea who are the albatross. Like, these birds can live 70 years. They, mature that late and all the things they do. So when we start to bring this information to fishermen, they start to understand why it's unfair to kill them if they have ways to avoid it. But it's a very slow process and needs a lot of effort. And the possibility to get on board with these guys are very important, because then we are like intense. You stay the guys all the time during days, lock it into a vessel, so you have a lot of time to get into their heads more than if you are just into the port every day. So that's the thing. And like Richard, once you get albatross caught here with a ring, and then more than once I send pictures to Richard, and Richard send back the history of the bird and the picture of the bird on the nest. And then I bring back this to the fishermen and say, look, remember that bird? Oh, it's 40 years old, and this and blah, blah, blah. And then the guy just see, what? It's older than me? Oh man, this is just so bad. Kind of make them understand how bad is a death of a 40 years old wandering albatross, needless if you use simple measures to avoid it. So it's kind of a through awareness that's possible to make a change.
Great,
yeah,
thank you, Dimas. I think we're going to have to finish very soon, but I think that's a really good point that Dimas just made, that for fishers, having the people go on the boats and tell them about mitigation measures is important, but then also having the science background, so having the information coming from the breeding colonies and understanding what's happening with the populations, having the scientists tracking the birds so we know where they're going and which fisheries may be overlapping with them the most, and where climate change may be impacting birds. And then also the relationships with the fishing companies themselves, like Peter, who has done huge things to reduce bycatch, because without the fishing companies, we wouldn't be able to actually make any changes. And then people like us who are kind of working on policy and trying to drive change through bringing in legislation. So it takes a whole host of people to really start to protect albatrosses, and so it's really great, I think, that we've been able to have this session today, so you can all meet a few of the faces behind albatross conservation. I know we still have a few questions in the chat box, but I think we're going to have to finish. But I'll take a note of these and we'll answer these questions on our social media channels, so you can take a look on there for the questions that we've missed. And if anyone has any further questions, then please just send us a message on social media and we'll make sure that those questions get answered for you. I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I hope that you really enjoy World Albatross Day and you keep keeping in touch with the research that's going on. So please just contact us if you have any more questions, and please share the work that's going on. So happy World Albatross Day, everybody. And if your speakers want to say thank you, bye. Yeah, thank you, speakers.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. Happy World Albatross Day.
Bye.